Hey everyone, my name is David Pridgeon, and you might not know who I am, you probably don't, but I'm just here to talk about my testimony, about how God has gotten me through a lot of things, and how He's changed my life. It's gonna take maybe about 5 minutes, but I'm just here to share my story, because I feel like God's leading me to tell it. So, a long time ago, before I got adopted here, I lived with my aunt, and my aunt and I lived in an apartment together. It was really tough for us because she was doing her best, but she was blind, and she only got a certain amount of Social Security money, which she used to pay for both of us, and it was really hard for her. So in that situation, she really was struggling, but she wanted to do the best for me. So she decided to put me with this family who they seemingly wanted the best for me and wanted to take care of me and provide me with a childhood. But when they took me there, it was like all smiles and rainbows for the first 2 months of my life there. And then after that, the facade, it kind of fell down. And there's a thing that people say you can only be fake for 3 months, and that's basically what it was. Because after those 3 months, they showed their true colors, and they were physically and mentally abusive to me when I was 11 years old. And the wife she was basically crazy. She did all these terrible things, like she would hit me with the legs, and she would hit me with my belt over and over again, and her military husband would do the same thing. And one time she caught me stealing from her kitchen, so she took me outside, put me in their pool, and their husband came, and when I went under the water, their husband put his hand over my head so that when I would try to swim up, I was stuck under that water, and basically I felt like I was drowning. As time continued, it was just getting really points to the point where I was getting suicidal, and I was really struggling with that experience. And every day I remember being there when I would come in from school I would see that lady, and she would be in her office room, and she would always have this little red bird who would be knocking on her window. And every day, one day after everything was getting really hard, I thought of trying to commit suicide, because that's what the point of it. They sent me to this place which was a suicide watch for 3 days. I came back, and after talking to the people, I realized that what they were doing was not something normal. And I was in my room. I was in the room of their house with the door locked because they kept me in. And what I'm now realizing is they kept me in so I wouldn't run away. Is they locked me in there, and I remember just sitting there crying with the Christian music playing on, because that's what they had on there, because they said they were Christians. They didn't act like it. But the music was playing, and I remember just crying out to God for Him to get me out of the situation. And the red bird that would always knock on the window came to mind and knocked on my window for the first time. And I remember where that was the first time I felt hope. And a couple days later, they took me back for a court case back to my home city of Oklahoma. And they had that court case. And in that court case, it was so heavily in their favor, that the point that they would get me back, and that they would take me back to this terrible situation. But my aunt and my adopted mom and my now grandma were all in there praying for me. And in that moment, as they were praying, the judge decided, after hearing that the family that was taking care of me, that they wanted only temporary guardianship of me, the judge realized that something wasn't right and gave me custody back to my aunt. And that was a better situation, but all that feelings of rage and bitterness or something, I don't know, came out on my aunt, and I was physically abusive to her and made a lot of bad decisions when I was 12 and 13, and I hurt her. And you know, it was very hard because I didn't know what was going on. I felt like I couldn't control my actions, and it was really rough. And there was a lot of days where I just wanted to die going through that. And, you know, a couple years later, I think it was like a year, but my mom was talking to a friend of hers that we'd known since forever. And she was like, you know what, I'll take him in. And once I moved with them, they're my family now, things started to seem to change. Because when I was with them, I really learned more about who God is and like that he loved me. And I learned that my actions were wrong, that I shouldn't be so aggressive and just be this way towards my mother. And I went back to my aunt, I called her mom. And I went back to her and we apologized and we've made up. And as I aged, I really didn't have any care for Christianity. I just wanted to be on my games. I didn't care anything about it until my mom, my adopted mom, got me interested into it. She talked about the Bible so much, and there's something about her, that piece, that just made me want to get into it. And at church, I found it like so boring, and I was only there for the stuff afters until COVID hit. When COVID hitting was like the first step in my life changing, because we got a new pastor, Pastor Zach, who moved into town. And the first time I heard his message, I saw him and I was just like, there's something different. There's something about his eyes that makes me really think that he cares about us. And that was the first time I found an interest in like the Bible and really got into like learning about the word. That year I prayed for social anxiety to gone and it fled, and I was able to like talk to people. And that really started the first time that I really considered that I was actually like Christian, like really wanting to desire for God. And then high school started right around like 21, 22. So I'm 14 years old, and this like what started was basically I made friendships and relationships, but the environment I was in all the time wasn't the best for me. So it led to a lot of situations that had me feeling like rocky and have this very religious mindset of God and being like, oh, if I don't do this, God's gonna hate me and he's gonna like strike me down, for lack of terminology, and he's like so disappointed to me. That mentality built up over years, and I kept not knowing how to handle it. And year after year I would go to camp and Pastor Zach would still preach, and something about camp, I felt like I saw people healed, and I was like, why can't this be me? And I was just like wanting that like no-so experience, that like God loves me. And every time I would go to camp, I feel like it would be there and it would just disappear. That brings us back to this year, where I moved to a different school to get me out of that environment and get into like a more positive place for that I could really grow. It was tough, but I eventually graduated. And this year at camp, I went, and I was struggling with a lot of things, mainly anxiety coming back really hard and dealing with it, and just being frustrated because up until that point I was legally autistic, and it was being really hard to do things and really hard to struggle when you feel like you can't understand or grasp something that's everyone else finds it so simple. So I went to church and I was just so distraught. I'm like, God, I want this to change. I want this autism gone. And I know on the first night, as Pastor Zach was talking and everyone was praying, I just felt my mind be clear. And I was so like concerned of like, I don't want this to go away, that I didn't really trust it till night 2, where he laid hands on me and he just said to open up and let God come in. That's what Pastor Zach said, open up and let God come in. And I said, okay, God, you can come in. And that moment I knew autism was gone. And my whole life's been changed. And I just want you to know that sometimes you feel like God's distant. He's not. He cares about you so much. And that every experience that you've gone through Even though if it feels like it's just unfair or you don't understand why you're going for it, sometimes you need like a hindsight perspective to see that the circumstances you'll go through, they're gonna lead to circumstances where your life's gonna change. So even in the small stuff, you need to know that you're loved and valued, and that just because you can't see the picture doesn't mean that God doesn't see the whole picture. Well, that's all I have to tell you. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.